Always true.
In a bold move on the global stage, Slovenia is in the process of joining a coalition of EU countries in a significant diplomatic initiative, the recognition of a Palestinian state. As the shadows of the war deepen over Gaza, with Israel's bombardment escalating daily and no truce in sight, the international community stands divided. While major European powers like Germany continue to support Israel with arms supplies, this coalition is calling for an immediate two-state solution, positioning Palestinian statehood as the critical pathway to peace. This step raises pivotal questions about the influence of smaller nations in global diplomacy and their ability to reshape entrenched geopolitical narratives. We'll examine what impact this will have as the Slovenian Foreign Minister, Tanja Fajon, talks to Al Jazeera. Tanja Fajon, Foreign Minister of Slovenia, thank you so much for talking to Al Jazeera. First of all, Slovenia has called for a ceasefire and for all the captives to be released in Gaza. Do you believe that Israel, after 7 months of this war, is breaking humanitarian law and committing war crimes in Gaza?
I said it several times that what we are facing in Gaza with the highest death toll among civilian population in such a short time of war are violations of international humanitarian law, human rights law. And also the same goes and applies now to Rafah, where we see forced displacements of Palestinians, continuation and preparation of larger-scale military operations. So all these are really reasons of concern. And Slovenia, as you said, we are a member of the Security Council in the period of 2 years of United Nations. And since the very beginning, we are calling international community, all the actors, to have an immediate ceasefire. And now, of course, I was recently a lot traveling in the region. I'm also telling to Israel, don't continue with the military operation, don't do it, because that will further escalate the situation in the region. And we are extremely concerned that what we see today, it's also the use of starvation for a weapon of war. And this is utterly unacceptable.
In that regard, then, do you believe that Israel is committing genocide in Gaza?
Certainly we see signs of genocide. The courts are those to decide about the genocide. It's a bit difficult to say for politicians. It's something what I think intimate, but it's other what I say as the Deputy Prime Minister of the government. But I can tell you that it's horrible. I said a few times that the world has fallen on the test of humanity. 10,000 of children and many disappeared, many lost. We don't know what will happen with this young generation and children in the future. And some say, you know, that 14, 15 years, it will take time from today on, if the war ends, to just remove the rubble, not to think whether one can reconstruct, invest the all financial means that we speak about billiards, that people will have any decent conditions for living.
You mentioned Rafah, which many people in the international community had said was a red line. What do you make of Israel's attempts to take over Rafah in this way, the way that they're seemingly creeping in step by step?
I was a few days ago visiting Rafah, and that was some days already a border closure of Rafah. And it was horrible to see more than 2,000 trucks with humanitarian assistance waiting. And not only that, there is a lot of items for urgent medical help, items of providing clean water, energy, what is crucial for life of people there. And they are either delayed or vetoed by Israel, and humanitarian assistance doesn't come through. So my message was borders has to be reopened. We have to actually manage better and more humanitarian aid and assistance for people. As I said before, what we speak now is a complete starvation of population there and civilians.
Plenty of countries, including the United States, were adamant that the invasion of Rafah could not go ahead. This was a red line for them. And yet here we are, seemingly there are no consequences at this stage for Israel. Why do you think that is?
It was a red light for everyone. And I was myself in Tel Aviv speaking recently with Israeli Minister Katz, and I was saying the same, don't do it. But I hadn't had a single indication or a positive sign that this would not be the case. The same goes with continuation of negotiations or an immediate ceasefire that is a permanent ceasefire, and also discussions, what a day after, how to make sure that Israelis and Palestinians can live side by side, two-state solution, that a lot of countries are committed to go that way. But there was no discussion whatsoever, and that is, of course, worrisome when you have on the other side a partner, a government that has one solemn goal, and this is to destroy Hamas. And I said it very clearly on the 7th of October, when these brutal terrorist attacks by Hamas happened in Israel, killings of civilians, raping of women, it's unacceptable. Every terror and killings of civilians is unacceptable. But looking at the number of death toll now, speaking about 35,000 civilians among many children, and operation with forced displacement that is also a violation of international law. And there we will speak about accountability and international courts for sure one day, and we will insist on that. It's actually really, it's a horrible.
But for the people of Palestine, they need that accountability right now, don't they? Because they don't have years to wait. They're being killed on a daily basis as we speak.
They don't have, and you know, I am in the last week speaking a lot with counterparts in the region, and I have to say with my at least counterparts in the Arab world, they recognize the role of Slovenia. They're very grateful because since very beginning, as I said, we were also co-author of the resolution for a ceasefire that was first adopted in the Security Council. Then in the Security Council, we voted for a recognition of Palestine in United Nations. The same, we supported additional rights to Palestinians in General Assembly. So we are doing all steps to be really consistent. But now I think we know who has the leverage in Israel, who has to do really utmost. And I would say it's time more than ever now to really act. The time has already, you know, gone much too far, and people will not have life back.
President Biden said that United States weapons have been used to kill civilians in Gaza. It was the first acknowledgement of that since the war began. Do you believe that the US is complicit here? Difficult
see or comment. Most probably I don't even have all the necessary information, because in diplomacy, a lot of diplomacy is also away from eyes. But what I see is not enough. It's definitely not enough. And this is why in quite some societies you see certain pressure on authorities. It's growing. You see protests also in our faculties in the city about that we are watching genocide, that we are watching killings of innocent civilians. Gaza will disappear. We see brutal violence of settlers in West Bank, that it's growing. We see additional plans of Israeli government for illegal settlings. So all this, it's also in the absence, obviously, of a strong international community for at least those countries that has certain leverage.
You said that the US hasn't done enough. What should they be doing?
I mean, I also speak with Secretary Blinken, and I know he is really often in the region. And there are certainly big efforts to have continuation of negotiations in Cairo. I think this is extremely important, that these negotiations resume. And they resume in a way that there is a ceasefire sooner rather than later, and also a release of hostages. This would be an important step. At the same time, I think what we need to do is to support or reform Palestinian authorities in Ramallah to be able one day also to control Gaza. Slovenia decided to launch the procedures for the recognition of Palestine. To be frank, I wish to see it in a different circumstances, to have a concrete peace plan, peace conference, everyone sitting at the table, including Israelis, US, and everyone, to discuss what the day after and the political architecture. It's not happening. So in the absence of that, we decided we have a moral duty, at least a symbolic duty, to give a hope to Palestinians with this further step on recognition. And I do hope other countries will follow us, because a lot of countries are saying today, yes, we support two-state solution, but when, how, under which conditions?
like you say, a lot of people want a peace plan for all of the parties to sit around a table and finally find a lasting solution to what is going on. That's simply not going to happen at this point in time, though, is it? And what do you think can actually be done rather than Blinken having another visit to the region, which we've seen hasn't worked in the past to get a ceasefire done? So what needs to change now?
Just follow, it's our own common responsibility, the international law and the human rights law. Nothing is above that. And once we all respect and commit to it, then we are in a better shape and a condition also to truly work on a ceasefire and on a two-state solution without having all sorts of, different historic background, calculations or pressures. It is difficult. I know it's not a conflict from the 7th of October. It's much lasting, longer conflict that we also have to be aware, and it requires certainly every effort also in the region to contribute to peace initiative plan to truly work.
Slovenia...
So I wanted to say it's not only about now Americans or Europeans, but the joint effort.
On that joint effort, you've joined Spain, Ireland and Malta, announcing that you're ready to recognise Palestine. Why? Why is it important to Slovenia?
So far, we are still waiting other countries to see, but there is a serious initiative on the table of few like-minded countries. I don't want to speak, but certainly Spain, Ireland are in the first boat together with Slovenia. There will follow others. As we've seen now, we came to a number 145, I think, with Vatican together to recognize. So it's a significant number. And also the vote that took place in General Assembly recently that gave additional rights to Palestinians was with a quite big majority. So I do expect that what we did in Slovenia is, yes, we launched the procedures. In our case, there is still a national parliament that will have to take a final step, hopefully in a month's time. But we also want to create the pressure, on one hand, for the negotiations to continue, for a ceasefire in the region and for a release of hostages, but also to see an additional efforts of Palestinian authorities to really be capable of having distrust among the population and control over. We speak about Gaza, West Bank, East Jerusalem, if you look at the borders of 67.
For such a relatively small country to speak up so loudly is rather unusual. Why are you making a stand?
But maybe this is exactly the reason also. To be a small country, you can do quite a change. And we don't have big burdens, one can say, from the past, but we can bring different positions together exactly for that reason, if we stand on the side of international law and UN Charter, and we are trying to do so. So at least what some say Europeans or Westerns have double standards, and we are reacting differently on the war in Middle East and differently on the Russian aggression in Ukraine. No, we don't. What is our policy is policy for peace.
Obviously, a part of all of this, what is happening in Gaza and in Israel, is freedom of the press. Al Jazeera has recently been banned from operating in Israel. What did you make of that decision? And what does it say about Israel's democracy at this point?
I strongly condemned it, even more because I used to be a journalist myself, and I know how important is freedom of the press, especially when it comes to the traumatic or violence or war situations where media play a crucial role. There is a very concerning data. In Gaza, we've seen deaths of more than 100 journalists, and closing down Al Jazeera in Israel is something that is unacceptable. It speaks a lot about democracy in the country, and I think that there is a joint effort that as Slovenia is also calling with a letter, I think, with one of the journalists, a worldwide organization, to really reopen Al Jazeera, because it's so important that also people get credible information, balanced information from the region. What is actually the role of the media?
Do you think that that has made a huge difference, that there are people with phones, everyone has got a phone nowadays, and we're seeing in real time what is happening in Gaza, and that goes out around the world in real time? Do you think that has fueled some of the backlash against what Israel is doing, and how significant do you think that that has been here?
I am certain that has positive and negative sides because, yes, we get images. I get images from people daily, and you can judge images yourself. But there's also certainly some disinformation ongoing with different interpretations. Everyone can write everything. So it's also a confusion of information that has to be checked. For that, we also need professional journalism. So my desire is always that I come in the region and I can speak with interlocutors here because they well know the situation, they have different contacts, and it's so important for all of us, especially working in the diplomacy, to listen to each other, not only listen, also to hear each other, and then also to try to find certain compromises.
Well, you've been to Israel. As you say, you've spoken to your counterpart there. Do you feel like you have been heard? Did they listen to you?
I speak with Israeli counterpart, Minister Katz, I wouldn't say regularly, but often enough. And I visited Tel Aviv recently with a real wish to see some positive sign and to really urge it is necessary to continue with negotiations. Don't go to Rafah, protect civilians. Speak about how to ensure peace and stability, safety and security of Israelis and Palestinians living side by side in the region. I have to say that, and it's not a secret because it was all over the news, that at the end of the meeting we agree that we disagree.
How frustrating is that regardless of the truce that you go there to speak on your country's behalf, that you are seemingly not being listened to at all at this stage?
But listen, I believe it's most frustrating for Israeli population, those that want to live in peace. You see protests, and I don't want to blame all Israelis for that war. It's about the Netanyahu and the government. And people want to see also peace. There are many people that want to see peace. And they will have to pay accountability for that. And they are very much responsible for the peace in the region.
Wouldn't it be more productive if the EU went together as a unified voice to Israel to put that collective pressure on them to stop what they're doing in Gaza, call for a ceasefire, stop going into Rafah, stop displacing civilians, and stop dropping bombs on innocent civilians? Surely the EU is a very powerful, mighty bloc that carries a lot of weight with it. How difficult is it trying to get your counterparts within the EU to speak with a unified voice?
It's not an easy question for me because quite often I'm in a minority of countries that is more vocal, and we also call for an immediate...
That, though?
I wouldn't say, our debates became very emotional. That I can say, that it's clearly sometimes see that there is... we try to find where we can agree. And we certainly agreed on a two-state solution. We certainly agree that there is a need for a humanitarian assistance, that we are against the forced displacement. We agreed on a sanction against Israeli settlers. So there are a lot of elements you can say one agree. But then is the question of speed. And there are some differences when it comes to a real ceasefire, when it comes to, real steps on the recognition or the... Since I believe till the end of May, there will be more EU countries with recognizing Palestine. This is the effort Slovenia is also doing.
It's no secret that Germany is the second biggest supplier of weapons to Israel after the United States, Italy as well. What has their response been to your and others pushing for the Palestinian people?
It was good to see that Americans stopped sending at least some heavy weapons to Israel. I hope that is followed by everyone who is still doing so, because it's unacceptable to see that either the Western bombs or weapons are used to kill civilians and continue the war in Gaza. Yes, Germany has also, for historical reasons, wouldn't say so much different, maybe different approach. Whether it's contributing to the immediate ceasefire, this is another question you can judge yourself.
But the reality is that weapons made in European countries are being sent to Israel to bomb civilians in Gaza. That is the reality of what is still happening today, 7 months after this war began.
I can say Slovenia is not doing so. We are absolutely not sending any weapons, and I do expect the others to follow.
When?
Immediately. Yesterday, weeks ago.
So what sort of pressure are you putting on those countries that are still...
In all our discussions, we are opening all these heavy issues. Once we've seen the increase of Israeli settlers' violence in West Bank, we were among the first countries to try to persuade other countries in the EU. Sanctions are necessary for Israeli settlers. It took us quite some time to come to a united decision, which was recently. But you have to push, create a pressure. And I believe with what we are facing in Gaza, this pressure is mounting on every government currently.
The Turkish President Erdogan has said that the EU is definitely not doing anywhere near enough to put pressure on Israel. They have recently halted all trade with Israel. Is that something that you would like to see expanded from Turkey to other countries like your own?
It's always difficult to discuss about trade agreements, sanctions, because in EU we have one common market, we have one common system where we have to always search for the unanimous, so the unanimous vote. But it is the discussion that some countries are opening. It's also a discussion that my society and we are opening in Slovenia. But on trade agreement, on sanctions, it's not that easy to move obstacles that are there when it comes to unanimous approach.
Like you say, it's got to be a unanimous approach, but each country within the EU does have its singular voice. So what, is that something that you would push for?
We definitely, and I'm already checking all possible what is can be done in that direction, also with some certain limitations on the products to the country, export or import. But I can tell you, we don't have a big trade with Israel. We are rather a very significant small part.
Yeah. You recently met with Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas. What did you take away from that meeting? What message did you give him and what did you get back?
I tried to encourage them to move ahead, to reform the government, to do the reforms, to gain the trust of people, because they are also the ones in Ramallah to one day take control over Gaza, which it is a challenge for the Palestinian authorities with the current situation. I also explained him our efforts, what we are doing. We have usually good relations. We have some projects in Ramallah supporting women, children, psychosociological help. So we spoke about all possible steps, but also humanitarian aid to Gaza and also what can come a day after. So it was a good exchange, and I have to say that it felt a little bit more among friends, if I say, at least for the recognition of what we are trying to do.
Now, while most of the world's attention has been on Gaza over the last 7 months, obviously the war in Ukraine is still ongoing. There have been some very significant developments recently, with Russia launched a surprise ground offensive that has forced thousands to evacuate in the Kharkiv region, the northeast of Ukraine. It appears like no one actually saw that coming, that the Russians would be so effective so quickly there. Do you think that Ukraine is stretched far too thin at this point to defend the hard-fought ground that it has managed to hold on to?
Ukraine must not lose this war, because it's about territorial sovereignty, integrity, and we stand for that reason with Ukraine. No one can by force take your land away. And these are also, when you look at the Russian aggression entering now third year, full-scale operations, that these are also violations of international humanitarian law. And Russia is an important player in the Security Council, and since the beginning of that war, the world has tremendously changed. And although the world order that we were used for many, many years is further, I would say, jeopardized. So it's very difficult to find a consensus. The war is ongoing. One can feel that Ukrainians are in a big challenge. And we do, as I said, support and understand Ukrainians' fight.
It feels like you say, more than 2 years on from the beginning of this war, that Russia really does have the upper hand now. How concerned are you about that?
It does feel so. That is why I urge to have true peace initiatives on the table, and both sides are at the table. There are no conditions and no willingness or readiness for that. I always supported all the peace initiatives that were there. And currently also the Swiss initiative to call for a peace conference in Geneva, end of June. To make it truly successful, we need a broader support. We need the support of Global South, Brazil, other big partners, and also, at the end of the day, Russia has to be at the table.
Yeah, many have argued that if you don't stop Putin from taking Ukraine or parts of Ukraine, then it's just going to encourage him to invade other countries potentially. Do you believe that?
Did we 3 years ago believe that the war will really start? I don't think that anyone has a clear answer on that.
Yeah, because there's been many analysts that have said that that has been the excuse for many Western countries calling for more aid to go to Ukraine, that if we don't stop Putin in Ukraine, then he's just going to be able to do whatever he wants. But they've pushed back on that narrative and said that that isn't the case at all, that he doesn't have the military capability to go and take on another country at this point in time.
Not long ago, there was an attack on a nuclear power plant, Zaporizhzhia, and this is 1,005 kilometers away from Slovenia. We were seriously concerned, and we even launched a debate together with the International Agency for Atomic Energy in the Security Council to speak about the security of nuclear power plants during the war situations. We do have same experience from our past. So speaking what unlikely will never happen, I don't dare. But we should do the efforts to stop happening what is happening now. And we are not seeing really any end of this war any near.
Well, the Russian President Vladimir Putin has just started another 6-year term. Clearly, he has made patently obvious that this war isn't going to end anytime soon, that he is going to continue with what he's been doing over the last 2 years. What do you think that Russia's long-term goal is here? How is there a way out of the end of this war?
They have occupied illegal territories. They had elections on illegal territories. Certainly, one can agree that illegal territories, they will not never be willing to remove their forces from there. But they should. So now, whether we are strong as international community in our response to that, and I see that here are also certain double standards around the world. If others are critical to Europeans or the Westerns, one can be also critical to the other parts of the world that continue doing business as usual. And it's not business as usual.
Slovenian Foreign Minister Tanja Fajon, thank you so much for talking to Al Jazeera.
Thank you for inviting me.